Welcome to Mothers Illuminated, so where we help light the pathway through motherhood. I'm your host, Michelle McCartney, here at the Co-work of Londonderry. If you're a mom looking for a great place to get some work done away from the house and your crazy kids, definitely look at the Co-work of Londonderry at londonderry.cowork.com. Co-work is spelled C-O-W-E-R-C. They have office space, conference rooms, workshops for business owners, podcast rooms, and lots of great benefits for members. So today I am joined by Heather. And she is an occupational therapist that specializes in hippotherapy. So we'll go straight into this. Obviously, there's a lot of different credentials here that we'll chat about later. But what exactly, so hippotherapy is working with horses.
Yes, yeah. And I'll probably say my last name for you because that would probably be helpful. My name is Heather Ajzenman. And so hippotherapy comes from the Greek word meaning horse. So it's just use of the horse in therapy. It can be done by someone's occupational therapist, physical therapist, or speech language pathologist, so a speech therapist. Mm-hmm. So those are the three therapists that could be credentialed to use it. And it's basically the primary use is using the horse's movement to address neurological, motor, sensory differences. And then sometimes you could do other things. It's not considered hippotherapy, but it's still using the horse in therapy, off the horse, to work on other goals as well. So
yeah. So first of all, there's a lot there. So how did you, because it's such an interesting, aspect of, occupational therapy. Yes. So what got you to where you are now? What does that whole journey look like?
So long story short is I grew up when I was younger, well, I still do. I grew up riding horses, and then probably in my teenage years, the farm that I used to ride at in New York had a therapy center on site that had that OT, PT, and speech were doing, therapy sessions, and they were looking for people to lead the horses in sessions. So I ended up leading the horses in sessions, then I ended up assisting, being on the other side of the horse while they're in therapy sessions. So then I kind of just showed interest in, really liking the use of the horse, and then I looked into all the different types of therapy options and decided that OT would be the route I wanted to do. So then, of course, I went to college and then grad school and ended up getting my doctorate because I wanted to do research about incorporating hippotherapy. That's how it all started.
And so now you own your own business.
Yes.
And you have a child as well. So
yes.
kind of, how do you juggle home life, having a child, plus running your business?
So I started off obviously working for others when I first started off in the field, just to get, understand the basics of OT before even using the horses. And then I kind of went that route of opening up my own business because I wanted to be able to control my hours, and also that because I take insurance and so forth, it's really expensive for what I do, so it's better off just doing it myself. So then I went that route, which, interesting enough, I started my practice in 2016 as a side gig type of deal, but then ended up doing it full time immediately after returning from maternity leave, because I just didn't want to be working for other people anymore. So it gave me the liberty. When I first returned to work, I was only seeing 12 clients a week. And then as my daughter got older, I was able to just increase to a full caseload of 25 to 30 kids a week. But it does mean that I do give myself an afternoon a week to follow up with insurance and do billing and so forth. But I also, after she goes to bed, I do a lot of that. So that's the reality, is I end up doing a lot of work when she's sleeping. So
And I know you said that she's we were chatting before this, she's around 20 months old. And so she's still quite young. Are you guys planning on having more children? Is
Hopefully.
That gonna is that gonna change? Do you suspect, as a business owner, because I know you said that with her being younger,
Yeah.
you kind of slowly built up your clientele.
We're really fortunate that we actually had people babysitting us for a while, and we were involved with the au pair program for a while, and we were able to actually get an au pair over here like a month and a half ago because of exclusions for me being in the healthcare field. So that actually will be really helpful because the plan is hopefully we'll have a second kid when she's here or someone else is here. So at least like when I'm on maternity leave, quote unquote, I'll still be doing billing and so forth because I just have another OT I hired and I'm hiring a therapist to cover my maternity leave and then continue after that. So I still will be doing the billing and all those pieces, but I'm lucky that we made the decision to do the au pair because now we'll have an extra set of hands. Because it'd be really difficult. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And so real quick, we're just going to go into a quick ad here. I've got one here for Elated Canine. So Elated Canine Training and Pet Services, LLC, is here for your family's pets' needs. We work with all ages and breeds. We run day training in your home, or in our home while you're at work, private lessons at your home, group lessons, and a few other tailor-made services. Please contact Jocelyn at 603-479-7253 or on our website at www.elatedcanine.com for more information. We can't wait to help both you and your pup find the happy, healthy relationship that you're searching for. So we'll go straight into some of your credentials. I know you've got, when we looked at your website, there's things like OTD, OTR/L, DIR, Floor Time Advanced Certified Provider. So if you could kind of talk about some of those credentials, what they mean and how they, incorporate into what you do.
Absolutely. So the first piece is the OTR/L. So the OT obviously stands for OT. What is required after you finish your OT school, whether you do master's or doctorate, is to sit for a national board exam. So the R is what you get after you sit for the national board exam.
Okay.
And that's something you just have to keep up with, like your continuing education every 3 years. And then the L means you're licensed in whatever state you are. So that's the New Hampshire state-based licensure, which is a really fun process.
Yeah.
And again, you have to keep up your continuing education. But again, they go hand in hand with both organizations, thankfully.
Yeah.
And then the OTD just means occupational therapy doctorate. They just put the D at the end because, well, if you put the D in front, it'd be dot. All the other therapies that are like speech and PT, they put the D in front. But obviously, there's a reason why they didn't put a D in front. And then the HPCS is a specialty board certification I sat for, it was 2 years ago. So it was a hippotherapy clinical specialist. So American Hippotherapy Association is actually a really international organization that does all the continuing education courses on training therapists on how to use the horse in therapy. And then there's a separate board, the American Hippotherapy Credentialing Board, that then provides the exam where if you took after 6,000 hours and a certain amount of years of practice, you sit down for a lovely 4-hour exam, which I took while I was pregnant, so that was fun.
Yeah.
And take exceptions for bring water and all the fun things. So that's that exam. So it's helpful just because in order using the horse in practice to have all that knowledge and base of what how you use the horse, what theories drives your practice, also what safety protocols, treatment ideas, all those type of things. And then the DIR floor time stands for developmental individual differences, relationship based. And the word floor time is used because it's pretty much to throw out the idea of especially kids that have, different social emotional differences, is that you don't need to sit down at the table and make it academic and drive them to work there. So it's about taking it down to the floor and joining the kids in at the floor. So the model was created years ago, so there's definitely some changes in language that need to be addressed, but it was primarily created for children that have an autism diagnosis, which typically, though, adults like to be, or people that have autism like to be referred to as autistic because they don't like it to be like, well, I'm carrying a separate bag of autism and I put my bag away and I'm not, So it's, personally I try to use the word autistic just because that is part of who those individuals are. But it's also for kids that have like sensory processing differences, other diagnosis, a lot of kids that have a lot of like social and emotional differences. And it's the best way to provide it, it's like a framework. So it's like this whole idea of like you start down at like the bottom and you look at things called functional, emotional, developmental capacity. So like you have all these different areas of development and you start looking at like, okay, is the kid able to like regulate themselves? And is the kid able to attend? And then are you able to get some shared engagement and back and forth? And then you work on like basic communication and more complex communication and shared shared problem solving together. And then you start working on like basic play and emotions, and then it goes all the way up to like more complex where you like do like combining ideas together and like logical thinking and sequencing and all those higher like executive functioning type of pieces. But the basis of the model is pretty much that like you're not trying to change your child, you're just trying to get the child to be able to engage with the child. So like you join the child to where they are, and then you join their world, and then you build a relationship together, and you're able to actually like make progress with understanding each other better, and really understanding the basis of a lot of the kids that have these differences is that there's communication challenges, they have a hard time expressing their emotions. So like how can you use a playful way to actually work on developing those kind of relationships and abilities to access those things. So I did my certification through another credential, ICDL, which is Interdisciplinary Council Development and Learning, I believe is the correct term. I might be wrong. But they offer like online based training courses where you submit like clients and like you get like the whole class like tears you apart on what you do and so forth. But
that sounds fun.
So they have like an intro course, and then that doesn't count for certification, and they have like 3 different certification. One works on like one of those lower level foundational social emotional differences, and then working on higher ones, and then the one I took is the last one they have, which is a parent coaching based course. So you learn how to basically, instead of you engaging with the child, you're there to teach the families, or work with the families, not teach them, on how to coach them how to be able to engage with their children, so then they can take the skill sets, and they can advocate and be able to do things on their own without having to have a therapist being able to be the only ones to work with their child, and not being able to do it themselves. So it kind of gives them that autonomy. I can't look at the word I'm looking for, but like it gives them that ability to just own it and do it and be able to do it and have the ability to do it. They also have a training leaders course, which I haven't done yet, but so one day maybe.
So I was kind of thinking when listening to you talk, it sounds to me like at the end of it, kind of your end goal is to get to a position where the child can verbally express themselves, the family can work with them in that way as well. But is there really an end goal there?
So there is not, because every kid that is autistic or has a different diagnosis is on their own trajectory, their own path. So a lot of those kids are not going to be able to verbally communicate as much as you try. So it's definitely, the goal is how can you best support the family? And this is where the model needs updating in terms of talking about these things, because they don't. But I've kind of taken it and spun it in my way of like, I don't know if you heard much about like the neurodiversity movement and respecting like people that are like have different needs and so forth, and instead of thinking like we're going to cure everybody, we're going to respect the differences we have but provide them with the supports they need. So it would definitely be more of like, okay, if this child is not going to be able to talk, because of whatever underlying reasons of not being able to access language, which I'm not going to go into. But what other supports can we provide them? And so my thing is a lot of, okay, like these kids all of them are super intelligent and bright, it's just they can't access language. So from spoken language, I should say. So then that's where it comes in, okay, let's provide these kids with like robust, big, what they call alternative and augmentative communication devices. So like the big devices of the iPads where there's like 6,000 words on it. It depends on the kids. But, giving them access to communicate via like a device that would speak, use spoken language when they access it, or typing, or if the kid is younger, obviously there's more simpler base versions as they're working on language skills, and also making adaptations. Like if the child's is not going to be able to do some things, what can we do in their environment to make things easier for them, and how can we educate others on making accommodations for them? So.
Yeah, because I think, especially in today's world, it's like, everybody knows that, autistic children and autistic people exist. It's not like that's a hidden secret anymore, and it's just interesting because, like, there's still a lot of families that don't really, like, they don't have that struggle, so they don't really understand what it's like,
for sure.
For that family, and kind of what it would take to have that kind of support system.
Yeah, and it's hard, too, because I'm not going to go too much off that path, but there's, because of the way our government is and the way the funding goes and the way, which I've heard that down so many times, is that they push and push and push for something called ABA, which is Applied Behavior Analysis, which is pretty much trauma for kids that are autistic or have any of the social differences, because they don't listen to the communication differences, they don't listen to their emotional needs. Instead, everything is seen as behavior, and it's all about positive or negative reinforcement and external motivators, and not letting the kids getting internally motivated, which as a parent I feel like I would never parent my child like that. So it's like, why are we treating these kids differently than you treat what they call a neurotypical kid? Like, because it totally goes against everything I do as a parent, which is like the responsive attachment-based parenting, and it's totally like on the other side. But because they have a diagnosis, that's how we need to treat them, because we need to make them neurotypical. But it's like, we're not going to make them neurotypical, but we need to make them be able to gain abilities and skills and accommodations to be able to live in a neurotypical world, and hopefully neurotypical people will be accepting of them. Yeah,
absolutely. And you use horses.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more about how that works. And you said there's different like movements and stuff that they do.
So basically the setup of my practices, I guess I'll just go into like the basis of OT, so then it kind of like trickles down into that piece. So this might go out of order what you have, but I think it would make sense.
That's fine.
So basically, like, if a kid needs services, which I know we're going to later about, but if they need services, they either contact me directly or they get a referral, because from their doctor that says, oh, this kid needs, extra supports or so forth. And they come in, and I do primarily insurance. The kid comes in, and they need to get what they call an evaluation, where I do, like, mostly observation and interviewing the parents. If the insurance requires a standardized assessment, I do, but I have mixed feelings about that. I do an evaluation. I work with the families, and we kind of create, like, what are our goals that we're expected to address over the next 6 to 12 months. And then depending on what we agree on and the complexity of their needs, they'll come anywhere, mostly once a week, but I have a few that come once, twice, and a few that are 3 times a week, depending upon that. And then what we do with the use of the horses is we use the horses for about half of the session. So I primarily use the horse, depending on the kid's needs, for more like sensory-based needs, for a lot of kids that have motor differences, physical needs, which is, I think, a lot more clear and evident for people to understand. And then for kids that also have some of those emotional differences, and unfortunately in New Hampshire, you have a lot of kids that have, like, trauma from, like, the drug exposure and all those unfortunate pieces as well. So I have a lot of kids with that are dealing with that as well. And so what we do is, depending on the kid's needs, we have an arena that I have someone that leads the horse, and then I'm on one side, what's called side walking, and then I have someone on the other side saw walking. And now with all this craziness going on right now, it's mostly parents that are trained to do it at this point. But in the past, I've had students, and I have students coming back that will be doing that as well. And the horse is, like, led through the arena, or sometimes if we're lucky, we'll go out in the woods so we can kind of get that change in terrain to work on some of the balance. We have the horses change, like, the speed of their walk. Everything's primarily at the walk. we'll have the horse do different figures to kind of challenge balance. Because the biggest thing about using the horse is the horse's walk is exactly the same movement pelvis-wise as the human walk. So for kids, especially with physical differences, you're actually providing all this input on how the pelvis moves to help with their whole physical needs. And what's really cool, and within like, and it's, I know the research is 45 minutes, and my kids usually on for 30 minutes. So they're about getting like 2,500 to 3,000, maybe a little less depending how many times we stop, repetitive steps, because that's how many steps the horse will take in that time frame, which you cannot replicate in like a swing or a ball or and then so the kids with more physical needs will work on like their core strength and have the horse stop and go to work on strengthening. We'll get in what they call different positions, which are kind of like if you think of a baby developing, like we'll do hands and knees, we'll do squatting, we'll do facing different directions, crisscross applesauce, like all these different positions that you would do as part of development, but using the horse's movement to kind of work on those positions and strengthening and so forth. And then sometimes we'll overlay some games and activities to work on like reaching and all those pieces. So I think that's the easiest piece to describe. It definitely gets a little bit more harder to describe some of more of those like social, emotional type of and sensory pieces. But if you think about it, your motor system and your sensory system are all combined. So whatever you're taking in from your sensory system goes to your spinal cord, your brain, so forth, and then comes out as a motor action. So a lot of kids that have sensory differences, it could be like how they visually process things, how they hear things, smell, taste, touch, those type of things. Those are the 5 major things people know about, but the other important ones that people don't know a lot about is what they call proprioceptive and vestibular. So it's basically like your proprioceptive system is like how your joints like read pressure and movement in space, where your vestibular is kind of how your head moves in space, like your inner ear and the fluids, how it moves. And there's also something called I don't want to say this wrong, interoception, which is an sense that people don't talk about, which is your internal understanding of your internal organs. So like the need to go pee, the need to go feeling hunger, the need, all these things. And that actually is associated to, I'm not going to go into the whole science of this, but from a brain-based perspective, that actually is hugely associated with your emotions. Because if you can't understand your body signals, then a lot of kids end up having large emotional reactions because they can't, they don't have no idea what's going on. And a lot of kids that have hard time understanding those things. So there are a lot of kids that like get nervous when their feet are off the ground because they have vestibular issues. There are a lot of kids that crave that tight pressure to help them calm down. So the horse is great because it really impacts those 3 systems the most, because you're moving through space, your head's moving through space, you're getting that pressure to your body, and your internal organs are actually getting all those pieces too, which is a cool side effect with kids with like, I have a kid with like a significant genetic disorder that like has heart-based condition, and from her being on the horse, her whole heart-based condition has reversed, and she doesn't need surgery.
Oh my gosh.
And she's the only one with her diagnosis that's living past a certain age with no heart issues.
Oh my
so
gosh.
It's like,
that's awesome.
so, and that was definitely not something that I'm here to address, but that's kind of a nice side effect, is that it had an internal impact as well.
Wow.
And then the other great piece is that when we use the horse, we obviously, with the kids that can, we carry on a conversation. We could talk about like how the horse is responding and what emotions they're feeling, and I feel like when the kids are moving through space, like similar you'll see in some OT clinics, kids will get on swings and equipments, and once their sensory system is regulated, they're able to talk about their emotions and work through them. The same thing in the horse. I have kids that will not talk about any of that, but once they're on the horse, their body is in like the just right, space to be able to process all that information, and then to be able to communicate and talk about their feelings and reflect on situations and so forth. So it's kind of like a nice opportunity. And then sometimes we'll actually have some kids that if it's appropriate, we'll do stuff on the ground with the horse too, to kind of build on those relationships. Even simple things like brushing the horse to work on some motor skills. I have a lot of kids that they'll lead the horse, they'll set up like complex obstacle courses and lead the horse to the obstacle course to work on like their cognition and executive functioning skills. And then we also do stuff off the horse, because from an insurance perspective, as well as also addressing all their goals. You can't do it all on the horse.
Yeah.
Which is great because the location I'm at has 17 acres with a creek and
Yeah.
so it's all outdoor based except when it's freezing and I have a little indoor space. But
Yeah.
we work on all those skills with building, forts and
Yeah.
bridges across the creek and crossing the creek and doing all these activities in nature, which I mean is a lot motivating for a lot of the kids as well. So
Yeah.
so let's go off on a tangent.
No, that's I
Yeah.
mean, it's super interesting. So I know. So do you guys actually own the horses? On the
No,
facility?
thankfully.
No.
It's expensive. So I had horses for years, and then unfortunately, but it was the best decision we made. I ridden some higher level dressage, and I used to start a lot of young horses, and I bought a really nice young horse and brought her up the levels, and I sold her a few months after my daughter was born because it was unrealistic to be able to manage all that, and it wasn't fair for my husband to be home with her late at night and so forth. But I am very fortunate that the location that I had my horse at used to have a riding lesson program that they stopped because it was not profitable. But I ended up using one of their horses left, but they have 4 horses that I use, 2 that are theirs, and then 2 that are horses people they call boarders that keep their personal horses there that I use. And basically I pay per session a fee that half of it goes to the horse owner and the other half goes to the facility.
Okay.
So I just pay, I mean, it runs very expensive by the end of the month, but it's still cheaper than having 4 horses.
Yeah.
That I pay to the facilities, and that's the same thing I do. I come down, so that's in Chichester, and then I come down to Goffstown at Upreach, which is a big known therapeutic riding center in the area, where I see a few kids a week. And then I have another therapist that sees at 2 other locations in the area down here that she does the same thing with, and I manage she basically shows up and treats, and I do all the other technical paper billing and so forth. So
Okay.
Yeah,
and so I know you kind of talked a little bit about it as to why you do the hippotherapy, and I know you grew up with horses and everything, but was there any other further reason? Did you feel like hippotherapy was the best treatment for or the best method to help support these families?
So I feel like the progress I see is very rapid in this setting. I mean, I will be honest, a lot of my kids do get therapy for years and years and years, just because they have some pretty complex needs. I mean, all kids don't need therapy for a diagnosis, but if there are needs that are impacting function, then they do. I just feel like it's the kids don't think it's therapy when they come because they think they get to be with the horses
so fun.
and exactly. And then we're doing nature stuff outside afterwards. I feel like the kids just open up better. I feel like getting on the horse, and this is more than feeling when there's evidence to support this piece, but when they get on the horse, that their whole nervous and sensory system is getting regulated, that I have kids that will actually sleep. If they don't sleep, they'll sleep for 2 nights in a row, which they never do otherwise. So it's just they're getting the benefits that their system can't get. And I'll have parents say we couldn't come last week, they didn't come the week before because of weather, or they're away, and they're it was a harder week because we didn't, we weren't, my child was not in a good regulated state because they didn't get the use of the horse that week.
Okay, so real quick, we're going to do a quick word from our sponsors over at AK Property Services. They're a mom and pop landscaping and hardscaping company. From yard cleanups to 3-season rooms, they can do it all. Currently servicing the seacoast of New Hampshire. You can find them over at www.akpropertyservice.com. And then we'll dive right back in. So I know you have an experience working with a diverse range of, children and families. So what's the most common diagnosis that you come across?
I would probably say, autism, but autistic children. Yeah. That's probably the biggest one. Or kids that may not fit that diagnosis, whether or not they are autistic or not, but are those kids with sensory processing differences is another huge area. Or kids that fit in ADD, ADHD, whether or not they're diagnosed is probably my major one. I would then say the second one falls under is kids with social emotional differences, whether they've experienced trauma, drug exposure, unfortunately. And then I think my third one would be kids that have motor differences, whether it's genetic disorder or they were born or cerebral palsy, like they had a stroke right after birth and had cerebral palsy, or there's just these kids that come that are just something is they're just things are a little bit different. Their development was a little bit delayed, and they show some motor differences, some learning differences. And the good thing about OT is you don't have to have a diagnosis to get treatment. So if you're feeling like your child has some sort of difference, and if they qualify, then they can get services. So
so I was going to ask you, because I know you said that you take insurance.
Yes.
So, I mean, if they don't have a diagnosis, would insurance still cover it?
They do, because basically what happens is New Hampshire is a state that you do not need a referral for services. It's just based upon your insurance. So your insurance may require it, or they may not, or your insurance might say after a certain number of visits, then you're going to need doctor's orders. So, which is fine, because it actually gives me a lot of time to actually get to know the client. But the thing that is great about it is, basically as an OT, when I write the evaluation, a formal diagnosis is not what I'm treating per se, and I don't like to use the word treat because I'm not trying to fix someone, but I basically work with the functional impacts of whatever the kid is using. So there's a whole medical term about coding and stuff, but the coding that I use is OT-based codes, not diagnosis codes. So a kid can come in and have a motor difference, and I can give them a motor code, or they could have a sensory-based difference, and I give them a sensory code, or emotional difference, and I give them an emotional code, but it's not tied to a diagnosis, so they can still be seen, which is great. So,
yeah, especially because, I mean, I know that there's a lot of, moms out there who struggle having children that, have these types of not a diagnosis, but these differences.
I don't see the differences. Or I mean, a diagnosis or difference, or I mean, the community likes to say disability is usually the more proper term to use. But and so I know a lot of them end up in a situation where it's like, okay, I don't really have the funds, or they want to homeschool them, or they don't feel like the public school systems are doing good enough with the IEPs, but then they don't know how to address those issues themselves, and finding specialists can be expensive. So having it covered under insurance, I feel like would be huge. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends obviously on the insurance plan and what all those pieces are. But I think it's really important, especially for homeschool families or parents that don't want to, or even kids that are in public education, is that in our state and any other state, under 3 is what they call New Hampshire's early supports and services, or in other states they just call it early intervention. New Hampshire likes to use special terms. But I think it's important because they're it's a very parent-based, very working on not fully medical model, but also a social model, combine those two together. And then after 3, they transition them to the IEP, to the school setting. So it's very education-based, and parents get left in the dust because a lot of these kids need, from an OT perspective, in the schools, it's let's address fine motor, or as they get older, handwriting, or let's address there's sensory differences, but we're just going to give them tools because they're not a clinic. But these families don't realize is that these kids can still get OT, PT, and speech outside of school and actually make it work towards their needs more versus more of an education-based model. So, and then I know you used to sit on a couple different boards here. Yes.
So you were on the board of directors for the American Hippotherapy Association.
Yes.
As well as the Scientific Advisory Council for the Horse and Human Research Foundation.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about both of those organizations, what your role was, and that
so
kind of
the
thing?
American Hippotherapy Association, I think I mentioned earlier, is kind of the overseeing their more international base at this point for people, OT, PT, and speech, that use horses in their practice. And they run conferences, continuing education courses, so forth. I think their model, if I'm correct, is they're an education organization, if I'm correct. So it says they're a nonprofit. They have 2 different type of things. They have a board of directors that kind of oversee things, and then they have faculty that do all the education-based stuff. So after graduate school, I did my research study, which we're going to go into in a little bit. I was asked to be on the board, and I took on the role as the research chair. So I sat on the board and had to go through all those nitty-gritty things, which I changed my mind about being on a board of directors. And then I ran a committee for research-based pieces, where we help develop, because a lot of insurances get confused, that they think hippotherapy, because of the term, is a separate therapy. And it also gets confused with, and I guess this is good to clarify here because people may not know, is there's also that term called therapeutic riding, which is really adaptive riding and riding lessons for individuals with different disabilities. But in that world, unfortunately, they use the word therapeutic, so people think therapy, and sometimes they say they're replacing non-traditional therapy, which they're not, because they're not therapists. So the insurance world is very confused. There's a whole terminology piece going on. There's a terminology summit. All of it's still super confused. So only a few insurances will allow me to use to put the kids on the horse because they're confused about what I'm doing. That's a whole nother story. But from the research committee perspective, a lot of these insurances were denying because they're saying there's not enough research, using this treatment approach, which is kind of crazy because most of the treatment approaches don't have enough supporting evidence. But so we gathered like all the research, and we would every 6 months update all the studies so we could just hand it to insurances if they ever said anything. And then we were putting out developing larger studies and educating a lot of the journals and schools about, and higher education schools about what is hippotherapy, how it's not a separate therapy, but it's from OT, PT, and speech. So that was kind of my role with that. And then the scientific advisory board through the Horse and Human Research Foundation was, I just sat on their board and reviewed, annual grants they have, which they are on hold right now because of everything going on. Because research studies can't be performed right now. But then I stepped down from the board before my second term was up because I knew I would not be able to do virtual meetings, because it was always virtual because everyone was all over the world at like 8 o'clock at night when I was having a newborn. So I was like, I'm sorry, but I can't. I still sit on one of their committees right now related to more interest in getting the mental health world involved a bit more. So, but that's still hard to do. So.
And then there was the Scientific Advisory Council.
Yes, that was the one I just talked about, the grant piece. Yeah.
And then, so you're still kind of involved, but just not as much.
I was too involved. I had to make priorities met. So, running my business and then having time with my daughter was my priorities. So.
Yep, I totally
my daughter
understand
being
that.
first, but.
So real quick, we're going to hear from clinical hypnotherapist Kaja Weglars. She offers personalized hypnotherapy programs designed specifically for you with your unique goals in mind. Release low vibration emotions from the past, overcome childhood traumas, and create a life you love. Become a better mom, wife, and individual, and find your inner bliss through true self-love. Leave the past behind, overcome negative self-talk and unwanted habits, and become empowered. You can reach her at facebook.com/Kaja Weglars Hypnotherapy. That's spelled KASIAWEGLARZ Hypnotherapy. Or you can call her at 603-254-6716. And we're going to go right into that pilot study that you were kind of chatting about before. So it looks like you published the study in 2013. It's in the Journal of Occupational Therapy. And it's titled The Effect of Hippotherapy on Motor Control, Adaptive Behaviors, and Participation in Children with Autism Spectrum Disorders. So if you could tell me a little bit more about that study, what got you to do it, how the process of actually doing the study went and getting it published, and kind of what your conclusion was.
So that was part of my doctorate degree. So I did it at Washington University in St. Louis. So that study I started when I entered there in 2009, and it was finished and sent off in 2012, but it takes a whole year to go through the review process. So as part of my doctorate, it was a research-based track. So I ended up, because I only had a year to do the intervention and then write the whole thing up, it ended up being a pilot study. So we did, we ended up with, I can't remember the exact number of kids, 6 or 12. It's so long ago that I can't remember the exact number, so don't count me in the number because I ended up retaining in the study. But we, at the university, they had a movement lab, which was like, this can get really technical, but basically what we did is we had the kids come in and we did pre-testing with assessment measures that looked at, I hate the term adaptive behaviors, but that's the name of the assessment, but looked at their self-care skills, their communication, and then also a more functional based assessment that was it's called a preschool activity card sort that looked at the kids, not their ability to perform the task, but they're interested in participating in tasks.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So more of like, it doesn't matter how well they do it, but are they
they want to?
Are they trying to do it, or
Yeah.
have the opportunity to try it, or so forth? And obviously it's from parent base. But the biggest part of the study was looking at the motor control piece, which was really unique because this system they use, this lab had something called video motion capturing systems. So there's like 12 cameras that are around, and you put on these little markers that light up on the kids' like pelvis, and then there's force plates on the floor. So we looked at the kids standing on the force plates, just look at like their what we call postural sway. So like if a kid, it's really hard, but if they have like, if you're like looking at like the dots, they all kind of make like a figure, and you look at how far that figure kind of sways when standing still, based upon the marker, like the reflective markers you'd put on, and the cameras pick up, and then it looks at like their foot reactions kind of balancing on the system. So that was what we did pre and post with the testing. And then what we did for the intervention is, which wasn't clear in this title of the study, but it was only done by occupational therapists, and this was in outside of the St. Louis area. But they went to a farm that had OTs that incorporate hippotherapy, and the kids were on for 45 minutes just using the horse. So we were looking at just the intervention. And then they had like a whole clinical track of things to follow regarding like activities they did with the kids and so forth. And the kids that were autistic range from having spoken language to non-spoken languages, some using devices, some not. A lot of challenges with self-care skills and so forth. And what we found after, I can't remember the number, it was either 10 or 12 weeks of therapy, it might have been 8 weeks, I can't remember at this point, is those weeks, those number of weeks for 45 minutes, is that we found that after the use of the horse for that many weeks, that their postural control improved. So like their motor control improved, that the amount of sway that they had prior to after was clinically significant. And it wasn't in the study because we couldn't add it all, was that their amount of postural sway then matched the neurotypical kids after the intervention.
Really?
So they actually showed so much improvement in postural control that that you couldn't decipher it from the control group of neurotypical kids. And we also found improvements in their ability to complete basic self-care tasks, so like dressing and feeding. And we also saw improvements in their receptive communication, because they weren't really addressing the more expressive, so the ability to communicate with others, but their ability to understand language significantly improved. And we also found with the participation in things, is that they began also participating more self-care because they were increasing their performance, but they were also increasing more in like play activities. Like they were showing more interest in play, they were showing more interest in all these other childhood-based activities that before they weren't showing. So we kind of postulated, which nowadays I think there's a lot more going on, but we couldn't do it all in the study. But we kind of postulated that, especially for these kids, because they got improvements in their motor skills, that then they were able to then begin to access all these other abilities, which does make sense, because I'm not going to go into a whole tangent. The kids that are autistic, typically they have something called challenges with like motor planning, which people might hear is like apraxia or praxis, and that impacts their ability to access language, to do motor activities, and so forth. So like they think of an idea, but then they cannot tell from their brain to their body on how to do it. So by improving some of those motor skills, they're actually able to then send those plans to be able to then be like, okay, I have this motor ability now, I can then access it to then be able to do all those other things, which is really helpful. And there's also that sensory piece, which wasn't studied, but that is all connected too. So
so kind of going back to, I guess, the brain-body connection, I guess, if that's the right way to do it, is it that they didn't, like, know how to do the movement before, and that now that they know, they can then do it?
And that's usually, so it's basically is that, like, and it's hard too because some kids are different. Some kids can't come up with a plan, and then they can't come up with then doing the action. But I think for some of these kids, what we were seeing is because they had improved ability in their, like, they learned how to, like, you know, make these adjustments in their posture and their balance, is that then they learn to be able to use those adjustments naturally without thinking about it to then be able to do other activities that was before they couldn't do because they were so focused on just those basic motor actions prior.
That's so cool. So I know you had said before that the reason you got your doctorates was because you wanted to do the research portion. Is that still a main goal of yours to eventually go? Because I know it's been, I mean, that was back in 2013.
Yes,
so, you know, and that's, you haven't done any other studies since. But is that still a goal of yours to do more studies?
I mean, part of the reason I did the doctorate is because I wanted I love doing the research, and it might be something I would do, like, when I'm over 50 or 60, when I'm, like, not physically able to do this job as much because it's so physically taxing. So it was kind of the reason, but the reason I did it is because it opened the opportunity for me to get this specialty in using the horses, and I made a lot of connections with people that were faculty members of the American Hippotherapy Association. Because then part of the doctorate, you have an apprenticeship, so I traveled in 4 months to 6 different states to work with different, you know, therapists and learn their business. And I, like, the other focus was, like, the business side. So, like, learned all their business models and so forth. So then I'd be able to open my own practice years later without having, knowing
to figure it out later.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So.
All right. Yeah, that's all super interesting. And it's fascinating to me because my youngest brother, I think, was diagnosed somewhere on the spectrum, but he was still very high functioning. So he had an IEP in school, but other than that, you can't really tell. Yeah. You know what I mean? But it's interesting because I think most people don't really have the exposure to, you know, what it's like in the mindset and in, you know, in that kind of a thing. So, you know, what got you interested in occupational therapy and working, you know, with these types of people in the first place?
So I think, my grandfather, funny enough, who was, I don't know when he went to school, but I think he went back to school after World War I. He was born in, like, 1919, was one of the first OTs in the country back in the day, which I didn't find out until later. But my mother was also worked in special education, and she did early intervention-based things. So, like, I always was exposed to it, and I was interested in it, and she was like, oh, you should be an OT, and I was like, okay. And then getting the exposure at that clinic that had the horses growing up and, you know, volunteering for that nonprofit, I think got me really like, oh, I could do all my interests together. Like, I'll definitely go for it.
And so if there are moms out there listening to this, and they've got, you know, a child that might be on the spectrum or has a sensory processing, you know, characteristic, and, you know, and they're looking for this type of help. So, you know, where are you located here in New Hampshire, and how can people find you?
So I practice primarily out of Chichester, but I have another therapist and possibly another one at some point that do the southern New Hampshire area. The great thing about Chichester, it's pretty accessible from all parts of the state, because it's like 5 minutes from Concord, it's 40 minutes from the seacoast. I mean, it's at less than an hour of north of the mountain. Like, so it's like just very, I mean, people come from Nashua and it's 40 minutes. So, and then the best way right now is my website is old, and it's actually my name. It doesn't have the Play and Prosper Therapy on it. But I have a Facebook page, and then people could just message through there. So that's how usually people contact me.
Okay, and then because this is a podcast, I am going to spell your name because your name has a unique spelling.
Yes.
So if people are trying to find you on Facebook, what would they just search up your name?
The best way is actually just to type in Play and Prosper Therapy.
Okay.
So, because that actually is the name of my business page.
Okay.
So, so you just type in Play and Prosper Therapy, and it should automatically show up. That's why I created a company name rather than using my name, because no one could find me. So.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, because because your actual website is your
name. So that used to be
why.
the name of my business, and then I made a PLLC. So
yeah.
funny enough, no one's really found me through the website. It's all been through like Facebook or word of mouth. So I just haven't touched my website.
Yeah. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up at this point. So it's the end of our show. Mothers Illuminated does have a VIP group on Facebook where you can access extra content with a Q&A section of each video. You can be a part of a mother's mentorship group program through Facebook as well, early access to all shows, promo code for free shipping through the merchandise website. You'll also be notified a week prior to each show being filmed so that you can contribute questions that may be picked for the Q&A segment. It's a great program, only $8 monthly, and you can sign up for that through Patreon, which is patreon.com/mothersilluminated. The show can also be found on podcast.mothersilluminated.com, as well as our YouTube channel at Mothers Illuminated. If you're interested in being part of the show, reach out to us at mothersilluminated@gmail.com. You can also find related merchandise at Teespring, which is teespring.com/stores/mothers-illuminated. So Heather, it was great having you on the show. Thank you for stopping by. And, stick around for the next show.